You've seen the temple carvings, rows of perfect chariots, archers with arms like statues, pharaohs standing tall while the enemy flees in artistic panic. But real ancient Egyptian battles, not exactly a postcard from glory, they were hot, they were brutal, and they were terrifying for just about everyone involved, except maybe the guy drawing hieroglyphs back home. This wasn't some elegant chess match in the desert. It was chaotic, messy, and often smelled like blood, onions, and old sweat. So what really happened when Egypt went to war? What was it like to fight? Not as a pharaoh, but as a poor, sunburnt guy with a wooden spear and sandals made of hope. Today, we are peeling back the propaganda and diving headfirst into the heat, the horror, and the heartbreak of an ancient Egyptian battlefield. Chariots will wobble, shields will crack. And that loincloth, it's about to get very uncomfortable. Because before there was empire, there was war. And before there was war, there was someone saying, "Wait, we're fighting who?" So, how did you end up on the front lines of an ancient war? Did you train for years with elite instructors? Did the gods descend in a dream and hand you a golden spear? Nope, you got volunteered, by taxes, by conscription, or by that one neighbor who said, "He looks strong, take him." In ancient Egypt, becoming a soldier wasn't always a noble calling. Most of the army, farmers, laborers, peasants with a solid back and not enough bribes to stay home. During peacetime, you were planting onions. During war, you were told, "Congratulations, you're now defending the Nile. Here's a spear made of wood and your cousin's old shield. Good luck." Now there were professional soldiers, archers from Nubia, charioteers from the elite ranks, even mercenaries from Syria. But the bulk of the army, drafted men, barely trained, suddenly thrown into formation and told, "Try not to die screaming." You'd be lined up with strangers, handed a bundle of gear that smelled like it had seen 3 wars already, and marched off for training, which often meant walking in circles, learning which side of the spear points forward, and occasionally getting screamed at by someone in a leopard skin vest. And your reward for surviving the first day? Sleeping on the ground, surrounded by nervous snoring, while mosquitoes did target practice on your ankles. But hey, if you didn't get picked, the pharaoh still got his due. Men who avoided service often had to send grain, livestock, or even family members in their place. Because Egypt would have an army, and someone somewhere always ended up wearing the sandals. So you've been drafted, which is ancient Egyptian for conscripted under heavy peer pressure. And now it's time to go to war. No wagons, no horses, no hop in, we're invading Kush. You walked miles, days, sometimes weeks, across baking desert, rocky valleys, swampy canals, all in sandals that weren't even yours. Half the time you were wearing someone else's size, because the army didn't exactly believe in standard issue. And the gear, you carried it all: spears, shields, water jugs, maybe a chunk of salted fish if you were lucky. But mostly, just exhaustion, body odor, and a growing sense of regret. Marching meant blisters, dehydration, sunstroke, and group chanting to keep spirits up. Or at least to drown out the guy behind you complaining about his bunions. The officers, meanwhile, rode on donkeys or chariots, shouting encouraging phrases like, "Keep walking," and "The gods are watching," which, to a foot soldier, sounded a lot like, "We'll still be riding while you collapse." And sleeping arrangements? Don't get excited. No tents, no bedding, just the ground, your shield as a pillow, and maybe a friend to swat scorpions off your leg at 2 a.m. Some armies lost half their strength before ever seeing battle. Not to swords, but to dysentery, heatstroke, or giving up and walking home. But quitting wasn't exactly an option. Desertion meant lashes, prison, or, in rare cases, being fed to crocodiles. Not confirmed, but let's just say the Nile had many secrets. And when you finally saw the enemy army, Your first thought wasn't, let's win this. It was, I did not march 100 miles in a borrowed loincloth to die in this ditch. There's a moment right before a battle starts, when the shouting quiets, the dust settles for just a second, and every soldier realizes they're standing one spear length away from absolute madness. And then chaos. The battlefield wasn't some neat checkerboard of warriors squaring off in dramatic symmetry. It was hot, crowded, noisy, and suffocating. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with your fellow fighters, all of you sweating through linen tunics that were never meant for combat. You're gripping a weapon that was probably handed to you last week, hoping it doesn't snap the moment it matters most. You can't see more than a few feet ahead. The sun is in your eyes, the dust from thousands of trampling feet chokes your lungs, and someone behind you is already throwing up from pure nerves. Then it starts. Horns blare, war cries erupt, the lines surge forward, not because it's strategic, but because no one wants to be the first to run or the last to move. The sounds are overwhelming, the clash of bronze on bronze, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, the panic shouting of orders no one can hear. And if you fall, good luck. There's no pausing the battle to help you up. Combat was fast, brutal, and terrifyingly random. 1 second you're swinging, the next you're tripping over someone's shield or ducking from a stone launched by someone who thought, close enough. There were no real front lines once the fighting began, just knots of men tangled in fear and fury, trying to stay alive while the gods, the dust, and the sun all watched in judgment. This wasn't a glorious charge. This was survival. And in the heart of the chaos, victory was just a word someone might scream later, if they made it out. If the foot soldiers were the body of the Egyptian army, the chariots were its teeth, sleek, fast, and terrifying. They weren't just transportation. They were mobile death machines designed to punch holes in enemy lines and scatter formations like startled pigeons. Each Egyptian chariot held 2 men, 1 driver, 1 archer. The driver's job, stay alive. The archer's job, make sure the other guy didn't. And these weren't your average bows. Egyptian composite bows could fire arrows up to 250 meters, fast, sharp, and deadly. You think dodgeball was scary in school? Try dodging an arrow from a moving chariot while wearing 30 pounds of bronze. The chariots hit first, carving through enemy ranks with brutal momentum. Behind them came volleys of arrows, not from one direction, but from every angle. The battlefield became a pin-cushion nightmare. You could raise your shield to block 1 shot, only to catch 3 more in your ribs a second later. Then came the slingers. That's right, rocks. Smooth, palm-sized stones slung at terrifying speeds. 1 good hit could shatter a jaw, crack a skull, or drop a horse mid-gallop. The Egyptians used every tool they had: thrown javelins, fire-tipped arrows, even psychological warfare, trumpets, taunts, and terrifying war masks to make sure the enemy was as afraid as they were injured. And the sand... oh, the sand. Every charge kicked up dust clouds that blinded the enemy, and sometimes their own troops. You didn't always know who you were swinging at until it was too late. Friend or foe? I don't know. He has a stick, I have a stick. Let's find out. Add to this the chaos of chariot crashes, horses panicking, and archers screaming from arrow wounds. And it's clear, this wasn't some elegant dance of warriors. It was mayhem with a strategy. Barely. And if you thought chariots were terrifying during the fight, just wait until they started running people down during the retreat. So the dust settles, the trumpets fall silent, the screaming finally stops. And what's left? Not a clean, victorious ending with heroic cheers, just heat. blood, buzzing flies, and the kind of silence that feels too loud. There were no medics waiting with stretchers, no field hospitals, no miracle surgeries. If you were wounded and couldn't walk, you were probably going to die. Slowly, painfully, under the sun, and if you were lucky enough to survive the stabbing, infection was waiting to finish the job. A simple cut, a punctured gut, or a smashed bone could turn lethal in hours or days, and here's where it gets really dark. If you were lying on the battlefield too hurt to move, you weren't just waiting to be rescued. You were hoping your allies didn't come by first, because the living needed sandals, they needed food, they needed anything useful, and you weren't going to be needing that stuff anymore. Right? Soldiers stripped the dead, and the nearly dead, of gear, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. Even linen tunics were scavenged. And if your body held anything valuable, it was open season. Priests might have blessed you before battle, but nobody was reading last rites now. There were too many corpses and too few hands. Some kings, if they won, would order the enemy dead to be mutilated, to count them, to make a political point, to leave a message. One of Rameses II's most infamous victories. His men supposedly chopped off the hands, and sometimes more intimate parts, of the fallen just to tally the body count. And what about burial? Ha! Most of the dead weren't buried at all. They were left to rot, dry out, or be eaten by scavengers. Victory didn't mean peace. It just meant your side lost fewer people than the other guy. Let's say you made it through the chaos. You didn't get trampled by a chariot, didn't take an arrow to the gut, didn't get crushed beneath a panicked ox, but you did take a nasty spear jab to the thigh. Congratulations, you now get to experience ancient Egypt's version of the emergency room. Spoiler alert, it's not a tent filled with herbs and hope. It's a dusty mat, a few jars of honey, and a priest murmuring spells while you scream into the dirt. Egyptian battlefield medicine was a mix of impressive improvisation and terrifying guesswork. They knew how to clean wounds, kind of. Honey was used as an antiseptic, which actually worked. They wrapped injuries in linen, bound fractures with splints made from reeds, and sometimes even stitched gashes shut. But anesthetic? Nope. Just grit your teeth and maybe bite a stick. Got an arrow stuck in you. They'd break the shaft, push it through, and hope you didn't pass out, or bleed out, before the bandages went on. And if the wound was deep, you got ointments of goose fat, frankincense, and possibly crocodile dung. Did it help? Unclear. Did it smell like divine punishment? Absolutely. Broken bones might be set, but anything worse, shattered ribs, disembowelment, severe burns, was basically a death sentence. And the healing process didn't stop at the body. Spiritual wounds were just as dangerous. If you killed someone in battle, there was a risk your soul, your car, might become unbalanced. That could mean nightmares, madness, or worse, being haunted by the person you killed. So while your leg was rotting and your fever climbing, a priest might also wave incense over your face and chant a spell to realign your spirit. Sometimes they'd give you amulets. Sometimes they'd write protective symbols on your skin. Sometimes they'd just say, "Good luck," and walk away slowly. Because battlefield trauma wasn't just physical. It was mental. It was spiritual. And it was mostly untreated. You didn't go home a hero. You went home with scars, both seen and unseen. And if you didn't, you became another nameless ghost on the sands. So you survived. Your bandages are filthy, your nerves are fried, your sandals are held together with hope. But you're alive. You limp back to your village thinking, at least the pharaoh will reward us for this madness. Right? Not exactly. Because while your leg is still oozing, the royal scribes are already hard at work, rewriting history. According to the official victory scroll, your army crushed the enemy, the gods smiled from the heavens, and Pharaoh personally turned the tide of battle by lifting his golden axe and shouting something poetic. Never mind that half the army fled, the other half bled out, and the survivors are now arguing over who gets the least mouldy loaf of bread. In reality, maybe it was a draw, maybe it was a retreat, maybe Pharaoh didn't even show up. But none of that matters, because stone remembers what the king wants it to remember. The battlefield may be soaked in blood, but the temple walls, they're covered in glorious art of divine victory. You get a mention if you're lucky, a list of names carved so small it might as well say extra. Your actual reward? Maybe a ration of beer, a chunk of barley bread, and a well-done soldier from a guy who didn't leave his chariot. No pension, no medals, no therapy. Just the satisfaction of knowing your suffering was turned into royal propaganda before the blood even dried. And that's how ancient Egypt won its battles. Not always on the field, but on the walls. You might think ancient Egyptian battles were fought by sweaty guys with spears and bad sandals, and you'd be right. But to the Egyptians, every single battle was a divine performance. Pharaoh didn't just lead the army. He became Horus, the falcon god of kingship and war. His enemies, embodiments of chaos, usually associated with Set, the god of storms and destruction. So yeah, when two armies clashed, it wasn't just for territory, it was cosmic theatre. Before the first spear was thrown, there were rituals, offerings, sometimes even animal sacrifices. Priests recited spells, scribes consulted omens, soldiers fasted, prayed, or tied amulets onto their bodies, anything to secure the favor of the gods. This wasn't just war, it was a spiritual test. And you didn't go into battle naked, spiritually speaking. Protective charms were common. An amulet of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague. Essential. A scrap of papyrus with a blessing from Thoth. Can't hurt. Literal war insurance powered by divine bureaucracy. If you survived, you thanked the gods. If you didn't survive, well, maybe the gods needed another soldier in the afterlife. Some believed the Ka, your life force, might carry on the battle alongside Osiris in the underworld, fighting chaos for eternity, which frankly sounds like a terrible retirement plan. And when the fighting was over, did anyone thank the general, the foot soldiers, the guy who tripped into an enemy spear but accidentally created a flanking maneuver? Nope. Victory was attributed to the gods, even if it was a bloody mess. Even if half the army limped home with tooth infections and sand burns, the scribes still wrote, "The gods delivered us." The pharaoh didn't just win, the universe was restored. Order had triumphed over chaos. Which sounds amazing, until you realize that, to keep that cosmic balance intact, someone would need to go back out there and fight again next year. Conclusion? War was hell. Then you had to farm. So the gods got their victory, the pharaoh got his statue, and the scribes got busy rewriting the bloodbath into a bedtime story. But you limped home, if you were lucky, to pick up a hoe and start planting barley with a cracked rib and half a sandal. Because in ancient Egypt, war wasn't a path to glory, it was a detour from your real job. There were no medals, no parades, just sore muscles, infected wounds, and the joy of harvesting onions while trying not to cough up sand. The pharaoh got eternal honor. You got back pain. And if you ever bragged about your battle scars, you better do it fast, before tooth rot or another levy call came knocking. Because war in Egypt wasn't about conquest. It was about survival. And once the spears stopped flying, someone still had to feed the gods, the palace, and everyone in between. You survived a battle? Great! Now get back to work! If this peek into Egypt's sand-covered slaughter fields made you rethink heroic history, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Would you rather ride a chariot or fake your own injury on day one? More gritty truths from the Nile coming soon, because history wasn't always golden masks and divine pharaohs. Sometimes it was just trying to make it home alive.